How's it going, everyone? So, I didn't know this, but electric vehicles apparently have been around since the 1800s. It's not new tech. It's actually super old ass tech. It's actually older than gas-powered cars. And this is not some conspiracy BS that I'm making up. This is from energy.gov, the Department of Energy. So let's get into it. So in the early part of the 1800s, innovators from Hungary, the Netherlands, and the US, they were toying with this concept of using battery-powered electric vehicles, small-scale EVs. A British guy named Robert Anderson developed the first crude electric carriage around the same time. But it wasn't until second half of the 1800s that French and English inventors actually built some kind of practical EV, an actual electric car. Of course, the early models were super crude, little buggies, but in the US, the first successful EV was actually around 1890, thanks to William Morrison, a chemist who lived in Des Moines, Iowa. Who would have thought? He developed a 6-passenger vehicle capable of top speed of 14 miles per hour. Pretty wild stuff, actually. So after that, more EVs came out from different automakers. They began popping up in New York City. And New York City even had 60, says here, Department of Energy, New York City even had a fleet of 60 electric taxis. How crazy is that? By 1900, electric cars were in their heyday, accounting for a third, 1 out of 3 of all vehicles on the road. That blows the numbers out of the water for today's EVs, by the way. So at the same time, gas cars were being developed, but they had their problems. They smelled bad. You had to crank them to start. The gears were not easy to change, and it was a problem, especially for women. Now that gets interesting because apparently the early electric vehicles, not only were they popular with women preferred them, but at the same time, it was marketed specifically to women. So how did EVs go out of fashion? Well, the price. It was more than twice as much as a Henry Ford Model T. So, they eventually lost out, especially with the invention of the electric start. It eliminated the whole hand crank stuff. So, big deal for gas cars, and the sales blew the EVs out of the water. But going back to EVs targeting women, that is very interesting. And we see this in commercials today. It's not like some crazy sexist thing, off-roading, generally speaking, off-roading, big trucks, work trucks, they're advertised towards men, very specific. Big, safe, people hauler, SUVs, vans, well, generally speaking, they're marketed towards women. It's crazy. New York, first electric cab actually arrived in 1897. On top of that, the next year, 1898, the world's first hybrid was introduced. Pretty crazy. But even back then, all EVs were basically seen as urban vehicles, kind of like today. Taking a road trip with an EV, oh boy, I've done it, and it is such a pain. I hate to say it. Fun to drive, but a pain for everything else. So anyway, city cars. Women were driving the EVs. It didn't smell. They didn't have to hand crank it, of course. And they didn't have to worry about the ranges because they're just driving it around town, running some errands, etc., etc. But in particular, the smell or the lack of smell is attractive. And of course, it's cleaner, just generally. So this is perfect for, let's say, a family, a well-to-do family at that. And then the wife or the daughter could actually operate this vehicle. Now, what's interesting is a historian at the University of New Mexico. Actually, they authored a book called Taking the Wheel, Women and the Coming of the Motor Age. And they kind of go into this history of women, electric vehicles, urban and rural car dynamics. So for the urban female drivers of the electric vehicles of the times, the author Virginia Scharf, she goes on to say, it's an understanding of an electric vehicle from the point of view from someone who can accept restrictions on their mobility. Pretty interesting. Now, link below, the Edison Tech Center, the Miracle of Electricity and Engineering. It's an actual website. Check it out. It's pretty cool. They have some of the history involved in electric cars, where they talk about Joseph Henry in 1831, a math professor in Albany, New York, builds the first electric motor in his quest to understand electromagnetism. Pretty wild. Can you imagine all these guys back then? I mean, man, the level of brain power that was happening at the time is amazing. Truly, truly amazing. very inspiring. The Edison Tech Center also shows these old school carriages, and you can see kind of the old engine, the electric motor that they were using. See the chain on the differential, the battery connection. It's pretty wild stuff. Check out this video of the guy riding it at 25 miles an hour.
And it's been totally restored. My father did the mechanical restoration, and I finished it with the cosmetic restoration. It runs, it'll go about 25 miles an hour. It has 5 forward speeds, a tiller steering mechanism here, and it has batteries in front and in back. It's a 24-volt system, and it was used by E.W. Rice at the Schenectady GE. And on the front of it is a parking sticker badge, metal parking badge from the GE parking lot there.
But anyways, according to the Edison Tech Center, some of the electric vehicles are marketed as a sitting room on wheels. Basically that it's super clean, perfect for women. Or even the dealerships, they had set up these tea rooms, basically showing how posh and clean everything actually is with the EV. It's like going to a fancy Tesla dealer where you're treated like a king, where everything is posh. Apparently even the gas car automakers, for example, Ford, he would buy his wife electric vehicles roughly 8 to 10 years after he came up with the Model T. Why? Because women preferred them. They were clean. And I'm not talking about the environment. So remember, the EV offered a lot of simplicity for women. The vehicles avoided mechanical issues, no gear changes. I mean, guys don't know anything about cars nowadays, so imagine the ladies. There's a quote by a New York Times reporter in 1909, pretty wild, adding that the electric car is essentially a woman's car. Interesting. This one's from 1911, pointed out that EVs were preferable for women because early gas cars required more strength to crank, of course. But with Ford's Model T costing roughly $650 and a comparable EV roughly $1,750, it's a considerable amount more. And it just killed EV sales. Of course, gas was cheap and abundant, so you can travel very far. And then the last successful mass-produced EV just died, 1920. So the more things change, the more things stay the same. But of the whole history lesson that I was looking into, I was actually very surprised that the advances were coming from electric motors. So in a sense, in the beginning, EVs, electric vehicles, were more advanced than gas-powered cars until they were overtaken. But it wasn't for many years that gas cars caught up. Pretty interesting. Just like today, back then, EVs, they were centered around urbanites, and it makes perfect sense. Of course, infrastructure is a big deal. Maybe in the future, at some point, infrastructure will get better. It needs to get better. Hell, the roads are crap anyway for anybody. It's not just for EVs. They need to be fixed. But anyways, hope you guys liked the video. Thanks for watching, guys. Smash like if you haven't. Please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Maybach music. Can anybody out there